Of my mother's reading, I wore her favorite color, dusty rose. She used to say it was the color of something that survived winter. I didn't fully understand that when I was younger. I do now. I stood in the parking lot of Halverson and Reed Family Law for probably 4 minutes before I could make myself go in. Not because I was scared. I was past scared. I was something quieter than that. The kind of still that comes after you've already cried everything out the night before, and there's nothing left to shake loose. My husband was next to me, one hand warm on my lower back, not saying a word. He knew better than to say a word. "You ready?" he finally asked. "No," I said. "Let's go anyway. I need to back up, because if I just walk you into that conference room without explaining what brought me there, none of it will land the way it should." I was 17 when my father decided he was done with me. Not in the way that fathers sometimes say things they don't mean in the heat of an argument. Not the kind of done that comes with a slammed door and a cold dinner and then a begrudging apology 2 days later. He was done in the way that people are done with a phone contract. Efficiently, with paperwork. He sat me down at the kitchen table one evening in October. I remember it was October because the light was going golden through the window and there was a smell of something burning in the air, leaves somewhere, or maybe someone's trash. And he told me that I had 36 hours to remove myself from the property. That's the word he used. Property, not home, not your room. Property. I asked him why. He said I knew why. I didn't. I genuinely did not know. I had been a decent student. I hadn't been in trouble. I wasn't on drugs, wasn't sneaking out, hadn't done anything that a normal 17-year-old wouldn't have done. But he looked at me across that table with a face like a closed door and told me that some decisions had been made and I was going to have to live with them. My mother was in the kitchen the whole time. I could see her through the doorway. She was washing dishes that didn't need washing. She never turned around. I packed 2 bags. I took the cash I'd saved from babysitting, $240, and I took a photo of my mother that she kept on her nightstand. The one of her at the beach before she married him, laughing at something off camera. Then I walked out the front door of the house, where I'd lived my entire life, and I didn't look back. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I was 17 years old, and I slept in my friend Danny's basement for 6 weeks before her parents started to get uncomfortable with the arrangement. Then I spent a few weeks on another friend's couch. Then I wasn't comfortable asking anyone else. So I found a night shelter on the east side of the city that had a bed available if you showed up before 7. I showed up before 7. Every single day, I told myself one thing. Survive today. That's all. Don't think about a week from now. Don't think about a month. Survive today. It's remarkable what you can do when that's the only rule. I got a job at a 24-hour diner. I finished my GED. I got a second job. I rented a room in a boarding house that smelled like mildew and old carpet, and I was so grateful for it, I nearly cried when I signed the lease. I took community college classes at night, transferred to a 4-year program, graduated with a degree in accounting. I became a licensed CPA. I built something out of nothing, piece by piece, in the way that you do when there is no net, and you have learned very early not to count on one. In all those years, 19 of them, by the time this story reaches its end, my father never once reached out to me. Not a call, not a letter, not a text, nothing. My mother reached out twice. Both times through a third party, once through my aunt, once through a cousin I barely knew. She sent money once, $120 in a card with no return address. The card had a drawing of a bird on it, and inside it just said, "I think about you." No signature. I kept the card. I still have it in a box somewhere. I didn't push for more. I told myself she was in a complicated situation. I told myself she would find a way, eventually. I told myself a lot of things. And then, 14 months ago, my aunt called me to say that my mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. I called my mother directly for the first time in nearly 2 decades. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone. Her voice was the same. Thinner, maybe, but the same. We talked for an hour and a half. I don't remember exactly what we said. A lot of it was small, ordinary. The kind of thing you say when you were trying to rebuild something that has been underwater for a long time. But I remember at the end she said, "I should have been braver. I was never brave enough." I said, "You're talking to me now." She said, "Yes, I am." We talked every week after that. We talked about the cancer and about treatment and about what she was reading and about my husband and what I'd built and what I was proud of. There was one thing we did not talk about, and that was my father. I let her lead and she never went there, so I didn't go there either. Some things you leave alone because opening them would take everything you have and you need what you have to get through the week. She passed away in February, quietly in the hospital with hospice care and clean sheets and a window that looked out over a courtyard where someone had planted tulips. My aunt was there. I was not. I live on the opposite coast, and by the time the call came, it was too late to get on a plane. I sat in my kitchen at 2 in the morning and held my husband's hand and looked at nothing. A week later, I received a certified letter from an attorney named Mr. Halverson, requesting my presence at the formal reading of my mother's will. And that is where my father re-enters the story. I had not seen him in 19 years. I did not know what he looked like now. Whether age had been kind to him or not, whether he'd softened, whether whatever was inside him had settled or hardened further. I knew from scattered pieces of information over the years that he was still in the same town, still in the same house, still the same moderately important person in that small radius he'd built around himself. People like him tend not to move. The world they've constructed fits them perfectly and they see no reason to leave it. I flew in with my husband 2 days before the reading. We stayed at a hotel on the other side of the county. I didn't want to be anywhere near the neighborhood where I grew up. It felt like standing too close to something radioactive. You can't see it, but you can feel what it's doing to you. The night before the reading, I called my aunt. She told me that my mother had made certain decisions in her final months, that there was some complexity to the situation, that I should not be surprised if things were not straightforward. She used that word twice, not straightforward. I told my husband about it that night, lying in the dark in the hotel room. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Whatever happens, we handle it." He said it the way he always says things. Simple. Certain. The way you talk when you've spent years doing a job that requires you to stay calm in situations where most people would not be calm. My husband works for the federal government. I'll leave it there for now. We arrived at Halverson and Reed at 9:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled 10 o'clock reading. The receptionist showed us to a conference room, round table, water pitchers, the kind of neutral art on the walls that's designed to make you feel nothing. My aunt was already there, and a cousin of my mother's I'd met once, years ago. And then my father walked in. He was with his attorney, a man I didn't recognize. And he walked in the way he always used to walk into rooms, like he had already assessed the situation and found it to be less than he deserved. He was older, obviously. The hair that used to be dark was white now. But the posture was the same. The set of his jaw was the same. The way his eyes moved around the room and landed on me and registered something. Not surprise, not guilt, something colder. That was exactly the same. He sat down across the table from me. He did not speak to me. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I looked at the water pitcher in the center of the table. I poured myself a glass. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Mr. Halverson opened the reading. He was a careful man, unhurried, the kind of attorney who makes you feel that every word has been weighed in advance. He went through the preliminary materials, the date of execution of the will, the confirmation of witnesses, the standard language that most people glaze over, and then he started to read. My mother had been specific. She had left her jewelry to my aunt, a small cash bequest to the cousin of hers who was at the table, the remainder of her personal belongings, her books, her photographs, her collection of ceramic birds she'd accumulated over 40 years to me, and then there was the house. My parents had bought that house together when they got married. My mother had contributed the down payment from a small inheritance she'd received from her own mother. Over the decades, the house had appreciated significantly. In the last several years, my mother had been paying the property taxes out of her own accounts. My father, I learned, had not been contributing. And 2 years before she died, my mother, with the advice of her attorney, had done something that my father apparently had not known about, or had not believed she would actually do. She had filed for legal separation. They were not divorced, but they were legally separated. And that meant that the house, her name had always been on the deed, was subject to her independent decisions about its future. She left it to me. The silence in the room when Mr. Halverson finished reading that section was the kind of silence that has a shape to it. I could feel my father's attorney lean forward. I could feel my father's breathing change. "That's not valid," my father said. His voice was even, controlled. the voice of someone who had spent years making pronouncements that went unquestioned. The separation was fraudulent. She was not of sound mind. Mr. Halverson looked at him over his reading glasses. She was ill. She was under the influence of medication and outside pressure. He was looking at me now. Outside pressure from people who had reasons of their own for manipulating a dying woman. I kept my face neutral. This was something I had practiced, not in a calculating way, more the way you develop any skill that you need to survive, the way I'd once learned to sleep in a shelter without letting my guard down, without falling into the kind of deep sleep that left you vulnerable. You practice stillness until it becomes natural. There will be a challenge filed, his attorney said. This proceeding is a formal reading, Mr. Halverson said. Any challenges would be addressed through the appropriate legal channels. My father stood up. He was still a tall man. He'd always used his height the way some people use volume, as a way of making the room feel like it belonged to him. She doesn't get to walk back into this family and benefit from decisions made while she was manipulating a vulnerable woman. She walked away. She gave up any claim she had. The room was very quiet. I set down my water glass. I was 17, I said. And you gave me 36 hours. He looked at me the way he used to look at things that had disappointed him, like I was a calculation that hadn't come out correctly. You knew what you were doing. I was 17 years old. You made your choice. You made it for me. He opened his mouth. And that is when my husband stood up. I want to be honest about this moment because I've seen it get a little embellished when I've told the story to people, the way stories do when you repeat them. The edges getting sharper, the drama more compressed. So let me just tell you what actually happened. My husband reached into his jacket pocket. He set a credential case on the table and opened it. He's a special agent with a federal investigative bureau, and his credentials say so, in a way that federal credentials do. Clearly, without any room for misinterpretation, he said, I want to be transparent about who I am so that this conversation can proceed with full information. My father's attorney looked at the credentials. Then he looked at my father. Something moved across his face that was very much like calculation. My father looked at the credentials. Then he looked at my husband. Then he looked at me. You think that changes anything, he said. It changes the informed basis on which everyone in this room is making decisions, my husband said. He wasn't raising his voice. He never raises his voice. He never raises his voice. That's all. I looked at my father. 19 years since I'd last been in the same room as this man. 19 years of sleeping in shelters and diners and boarding houses and small apartments, and then, slowly, better apartments and a real home and a life that I had built from scratch. From nothing. From the $240 I had in my pocket when he told me to get off his property. 19 years of becoming someone he had no part in. Mom left it to me, I said. Whatever you file, whatever you challenge, that's her decision. You don't get to unmake it. You've been unmaking her decisions for 40 years, and she made one at the end that you can't touch. His attorney put a hand on his arm, the kind of touch that means stop. My father stood there for another moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, quietly, so quietly I almost missed it. She was all I had. I looked at him. The man who had put me out at 17. The man who had never called, never written, never, as far as I knew, once looked for me. The man who had stood in his kitchen while his daughter packed 2 bags and walked out into the world alone. I know, I said. That's the saddest part. He left the room with his attorney. I heard them in the hallway, low voices, the sound of a door. I sat back down. My aunt reached across the table and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Mr. Halverson removed his glasses, cleaned them with a small cloth, and put them back on. Shall we continue? He asked. Yes, I said. Please. There was more in the will. There always is. The small bequests, the personal effects, the instructions about what to do with things that don't have obvious homes. My mother had left me something else, beyond the house. She had left me a letter, sealed, which Mr. Perkall, Halverson handed to me at the end of the reading in an envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting. I didn't open it in the conference room. I waited until we were outside, sitting in the car in the parking lot. The engine off, the late winter sun coming through the windshield. My husband sat with me. He did not prompt me. He just sat. I opened the envelope. There were 3 pages, handwritten, in the careful script she'd always had. The kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore, deliberate and clear. She explained things I hadn't understood. She explained why she hadn't turned around at the kitchen sink that night. She explained what had been happening in that house in the years before and after I left. Things I had suspected but not known for certain. She explained the fear and the way fear calcifies over time until it feels indistinguishable from a decision. She explained the $240 and that she had wanted it to be more, but she was afraid he would notice. And at the end, she wrote, I watched you from a distance the whole time. I know you couldn't feel that. I know it didn't help. But I want you to know that not 1 year passed where I didn't know exactly what you were doing and who you were becoming. I was not brave enough to be there, but I was paying attention every single day. I folded the letter back along its creases and put it in my bag. Okay? My husband asked. I thought about it honestly. I thought about 17, and the shelter and the diner, and the mildew smell and the community college and the CPA exam, and the first time I had a savings account with more than $1,000 in it, and how I cried in the parking lot of the bank because I had never felt so unalone in my entire life. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. We drove away from Halverson and Reed in the midday light, and I watched the town I grew up in pass by the windows, the gas stations and the churches and the streets I used to know. And then the highway opened up and I stopped watching. There's a version of this story where I spend a lot of time asking why. Why did he do it? What I could have done differently? Whether there was a version of 17-year-old me who could have said the right thing, made the right choice, stayed. I don't live in that version anymore. What I know is this. Some people mistake cruelty for authority. They believe that the power to harm is the same thing as the right to lead. And for a while, sometimes a long while, the people around them believe it too, because it's easier and because the alternative requires a kind of courage that doesn't come cheap. My mother found hers at the end. Late, yes. Too late for some things, but she found it. I found mine at 17, standing outside a door with 2 bags and $240, not because I was brave, but because I had no other option. Sometimes that's how it starts. The house, by the way, appraised last month. We're deciding what to do with it. There's part of me that wants to sell it and give the money to the shelter that once gave me a bed before 7. There's another part of me that thinks about that dusty rose paint color and the tulips someone planted in the courtyard of the hospital where my mother died, and whether there's something in the house worth keeping. I haven't decided yet, but for the first time in 19 years, I'm the one who gets to.